All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about Joe Gow, the former chancellor of the University of Wisconsin LaCrosse campus, who got fired this past week when it was discovered by the Board of Regents that he had been recording pornographic material with his wife and posting it on PornHub and OnlyFans and some other sites. And they had also launched this YouTube channel about cooking with porn stars or something like that. I don't know the exact, I think sexy, healthy cooking is what they were calling it. And they had a number of porn star guests on the show and they'd cook together and kind of have an interview together. My takeaway is I am shocked. I'm shocked the Board of Regents would fire him for this type of activity. But seriously, it brings up several leadership issues, which is why we're going to talk about it on this micro episode of the Sense and Signal podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dan Tarker, and I've been away for a while. We haven't been posting over the winter break because I've been super busy at work, and that actually plays into a theme on this Joe Gow story. So what we're going to talk about today is just a quick summary of what's going on with Joe Gow and his wife, Carmen Wilson, and so maybe some other potential scandals they've been involved in the past as well, because this isn't coming out of nowhere. These things rarely do. They kind of erupt, but the kindling had been smoldering for a while before the fires took hold. I'm going to give you a quick review of their cooking show because I took the opportunity to watch it a couple times or a couple episodes, and so you don't have to watch it. It is very cringy, so we'll be talking about the cringe of their show. We're also going to talk about the freedom of speech aspect. He's saying his freedom of speech is being trampled on. Not everyone agrees with that, and I think that brings up some important legal issues that are kind of interesting to talk about in terms of free speech and employment. The role of the chancellor. What is a role as an executive chancellor of a university? And how does that impact the decision of the Board of Regents to terminate his contract? We'll also talk about some other leadership issues that arise out of this story or are highlighted by the story. So let's just get to it. Joe Gow, him and his wife, as I've said, were caught making pornographic videos and posting them online. He's, I think, around 63 years old. I'm not sure what Carmen Wilson's age is. Interestingly, he is a chancellor of a university in the state of Wisconsin, and that is a prominent role. It is basically the head of that university. He had some previous scandals before. He had brought a porn star into the campus a few years back, I think around 2018. Nina Hartley, he brought her to campus to speak and was going to pay her with university funds about $5,000. A scandal broke out around that, and he ended up paying her with his own money, apparently. And he didn't get a raise that year. I guess every year there's a standard raise that chancellors would get. And he was denied his raise that year due to that scandal. Interestingly, though, they did not take action to terminate him then, even though potentially that should have been a signal that something was going on with this guy and his wife. Another interesting piece of this story that I find fascinating is that his wife, Carmen Wilson, served as the chair of the search committee for the chancellor position that ended up selecting him as chancellor. This was before they were married. And then she served as his chief of staff for several years, after he was selected as chancellor. And that's obviously when they began to form the relationship. They got married. She ends up leaving and becomes a provost and vice president of academic affairs at another university. But they're together, obviously, and they start during this time to start making pornographic material. They claim initially for themselves, and then they started uploading it to OnlyFans and some other places as well, PornHub or whatever. So this is also where it gets interesting. They also publish a couple books on their under a pseudonym or pseudonyms about their experiences working in the pornographic industry as a side hustle. kind of fascinating that the guy's making over 200 and something $1,000 a year. And his wife, who's also a provost or was a provost or vice president, probably making an equivalent of that. I mean, between them, they're probably bringing in 500 grand a year. Why you would need a side hustle for that is a whole nother question. I mean, you're making good money, and why flush your whole careers down the tube, for this? I mean, you're making good money. And, he has tenure at the University of Wisconsin, LaCrosse. So they're going to try and take that tenure away, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But why even put that in jeopardy too? I mean, that tenure that you have has market value, because it's guaranteed income as long as you work at the university, and teach, and do research. So, yeah, it's a bizarre thing that they just get involved in this activity and flush their careers down the toilet. But apparently they were doing this under the radar for many years, and they decided to start coming out more in the open. And so they launched this YouTube channel called Sexy Healthy Cooking or something like that, where they bring on porn stars and they cook together. And I'll be honest, when I first heard the premise, I was like, okay, that sounds like a curious premise. I mean, maybe porn stars are also good cooks. Who knows? But when I went to look at the videos, because I didn't want you to have to look at the videos, I'm doing this for you. I trudged into the dark recesses of YouTube to watch these videos for you, these very cringy videos, by the way, and we'll get into the cringe, to see what they were about. So I watched 2 episodes, and I have to say, they're really cringy, man. They are really cringy videos. But what was disappointing is the porn stars didn't cook. They didn't cook. It was the wife cooking. It was Carmen Wilson who was doing the cooking. And then you have Joe Gow standing to the side of his wife, kind of interviewing the porn star as his wife is cooking some sort of recipe. And I have to say, the porn stars come off as pretty flat, superficial. Oh, yeah, that you're making me really hungry watching you cook. I mean, that's the level of discourse we're talking about. I think there's one instance where he turns to one of the porn stars and says, oh, so you got any special projects going on? Total cringe, man. And she was like, well, I can't talk about my special projects until they're released. Very weird, awkward stuff. And then, so there's an ending scene where they're doing some wine tasting with the porn star after they've apparently had their meal, and they all walk off set together as if they're going to do some extra recreational activities that you can discover on their OnlyFans site. Really super cringe. And there's this whole moment where him and his wife are kissing in one of the videos at the end. It's just like, and it's really over the top kissing, and it's just, it's not good YouTube content. It is not. And so, and it's cringy. It's just the whole thing. And, if I were to watch this video and know that this person is a chancellor, and I'd have to go into a meeting with them, I could not take them seriously as a person, right? I mean, I think this might be a good opportunity to get into what the role of a chancellor is for a university. It is an executive role. It is one of the highest executive roles, or probably in that system in Wisconsin, the highest role outside of the Board of Regents, which fired him. And so there should be a gravitas to that role. And I'm not being prudish around this, right? I mean, if you want to do stuff and you're into different things, hey man, do it. But if you're in a leadership role, acknowledge that you're in a leadership role. You shouldn't just be participating in activities like that and thinking that you're not going to get away with it. And so if you're going to start becoming more public with your provocative activities, then you have to expect there's going to be consequences for that. Because if I go on YouTube and I watch a video like that about you, I'm going to have a hard time taking you seriously as a person. And if you're a chancellor of a university where one of your primary jobs is to fundraise and bring in donors and cultivate those donors so that you have income coming into the university on top of tuition and all the other funding sources that we need to run these institutions of higher education, how am I as a funder going to take you seriously? Honestly, it doesn't make sense. So I did watch a couple of the videos, and they are very cringy. Please don't watch them. They're vapid. And so I guess that can bring us to the freedom of speech argument that Gow is using. Like his freedom of speech is being infringed on, which it's not. The issue is whether or not this is a public concern. And a public concern is actually a legal precedent, right? Around whether public employees can speak freely. And we know, like with pornography, it is considered a form of speech. So it is protected by the First Amendment right, by our First Amendment. The question is engaging in pornographic behavior protected in a workplace setting? Now, he's made it very clear that he didn't mention the University of Wisconsin. He didn't mention his name or his position. So he says there's a distance between what he was doing in his private life and his workplace activities. I think that can get very blurry, though, very quickly, especially when your primary job is to be a fundraiser and be the public face of the university, who also has a side hustle as a porn star. The argument doesn't make sense. So is it a public concern? Because that's his argument, that he is bringing the conversation about pornography to the public, so that we can have a discourse about whether, there should be so much stigma about pornography. And I think there is a legitimate argument that we could have that conversation as a society. Should porn stars, who get recruited into that field when they're very young, have that stigma follow them throughout the rest of their lives, especially when it's clear that many of them are coming from vulnerable spaces when they're recruited by probably a very predatory industry at times? No, they probably shouldn't have to suffer the consequences of that stigma for the rest of their lives. This is also showing that the United States is still a very puritanical country. And so when it comes to sex work, and there's a very visceral reaction, especially when you're in a state like Wisconsin, that's, I would argue, probably pretty conservative. But I live in Seattle. If this were to happen in Seattle, sure, there'd be an explosion about it. Probably not the same level of dialogue around it. There'd probably be some advocates about sex positivity, maybe coming to his defense. But at the same time, I think most people with a right mind who are, sane, would say this is improper conduct for a chancellor of a university, again, because of that front-facing public aspect. So one of the cases that deals with matters of public concern is Rankin versus McPherson, which happened in a case that was brought to the Supreme Court in 1987. And in that case, it involved a worker in Texas who had listened to a story on the radio about Reagan being shot, and thinking that they were just having a conversation with a coworker by themselves, said something to the effect of, well, the next time somebody tries to do that to them, I hope they succeed. Something like that. The boss learned about it and fired the employee for making that speech. The Supreme Court said the employer overstepped the reach, because the speech was protected because it was a matter of public concern. So they were just expressing their political opinion about a public matter. And it was not having any negative or deleterious effects on the workplace. Therefore, their speech is protected. And so that's the kind of argument Gow seems to be trying to make in his recent public statements about his firing that his pornographic activity is a matter of public concern because he's trying to raise awareness about pornography, and it's something as academic we should be investigating and looking into and researching. And there might be legitimate questions around that. Yeah, sure. Pornography is a thing. It is consumed quite a bit. It's all over the internet. Sure, we should be researching its consumption and its impact on people. No doubt about that. But does his YouTube channel rise to the level of academic discourse? And I'm going to argue after watching 2 episodes, it is not. It is vapid, shallow, empty-headed content. I can't speak to the recipes. Maybe they're good. Who knows? I didn't watch. I kind of scanned through, honestly, because it was too cringy. But I will say it's not academic discourse. I saw enough to know there's no, say he was doing these videos as a form of qualitative research and was constructing semi-structured interviews with the pornographic stars to discover some themes around their lived experience. Well, then we could start saying, yeah, this is some academic discourse that we could get behind. But it's not that. It's completely vapid and shallow work. And so doesn't deserve to be protected by the First Amendment right. And a lot of people are saying it's not going to be. Interestingly, Fire is taking a different stance. They're saying that his speech is protected. We'll see how it plays out. I have a feeling he will file a lawsuit, and that we're going to get to see how this plays out in the courts and in the court of public opinion as well. So we'll probably be following this story for a couple months. When it resurfaces a few months from now. The final thing I want to talk about in relation to this story, though, is something nobody has been talking about, which is the amount of freaking time it takes to run a side hustle. It is enormous. It takes, I run this little ratty little YouTube channel. I got, no viewers. And I can tell you, it takes an enormous amount of time to do these videos, to set up the equipment, to edit, to put it all together. Watching at least his YouTube video, very high production values. And he said in one article, that, the amount of return he's getting on the investment into production is very minimal. He's not making a lot of money off these things, which is interesting. Because I will say, yeah, the production value looks very high. And he's probably paying the performers to come in too, and to participate as well. So that's another expense besides just the filming and the editing and all that goes into it. But I gotta say, that's no matter what, no matter if he's hiring a team of people to help him with this, it is an enormous amount of time. And a chancellor at a university, if you're at that level, that should be taking up all of your time. I mean, it is an enormous job. And I'm not saying in a toxic way, like you should be ignoring your family and stuff like that. Obviously not. But you should not have time for a side hustle of that magnitude. Maybe do some consulting on the side here and there, something low key, but producing a whole pornographic empire is with YouTube channels and OnlyFans sites, that's an enormous amount of work. And I believe that it gets into one of the biggest criticisms college employees have about executive leadership. That we don't know what they're doing. And it seems like for a lot of people, the narrative for a lot of faculty and a lot of staff is that we're paying these executives hundreds of thousands of dollars to do nothing. And, I once had a colleague who used this analogy. An organization, especially a college organization, is like a tree filled with a bunch of monkeys. And the monkey at the top is looking down and seeing all these smiling faces looking up at him. Hey. And all those monkeys at the bottom are looking up and seeing a bunch of a-holes. And I'm going to extend that metaphor a little bit further for this, because all those a-holes are kind of clouded or screened through foliage of the foliage of the tree. So you're not seeing all the layers above. You might be experiencing the droppings that are coming down from them, whether it's the morsels of food or other droppings that are coming to you from above. But you're not seeing clearly what is completely above you. So it's clouded, it's obfuscated by the foliage. And so when in doubt, you make up stories. And the narratives people often make up about executive leaders is that they have more time on their hands because we at the bottom of the rung are doing all the hard work, and they're just enjoying the fruits of our labor up at the executive level and not really contributing to the success of the organization. And this feeds into that mythology. Well, it's not even a mythology. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I've worked in higher ed a long time. There are administrators who do that. For sure. There's no denying that. There are administrators who get to those executive level positions and do nothing. I know, I'm not going to talk about specifics, but we know that happens. And so certainly looks like Gow had plenty of time to do all these other activities. What was he doing for the university? He's supposed to be serving the faculty and staff and the students at that university. But obviously, he wasn't, right? He couldn't have been running that whole enterprise with his wife and doing his job 100%. He couldn't have been doing his job to the level he should have been working on it. So, there's a lot to the story to talk about. I think the Board of Regents was correct in dismissing him. It does have a deleterious impact on his work performance, especially as more people were to find out about what he was doing. And he was definitely coming out. It wasn't like people were looking at porn and say, hey, there's the Chancellor on PornHub. No, it was that he started becoming more open and visible on YouTube, and that caught people's attention. And then they probably went down the rabbit hole and discovered this trove of pornography that he and his wife had been sharing with the public. So once that's out there, there's no putting that genie back. I mean, you're done. And there's no way in that type of position you can move forward. You're not going to have the respect of your college community, and you really need that social capital to get things done. I mean, I couldn't go if I knew one of my superiors was a porn star actively. There's no way I could take them seriously in a meeting. And if, again, as I said at the beginning of the video, if you're a funder, the head of a foundation or a charitable organization or just a rich donor, how are you going to take that institution seriously with somebody like that at the helm with that level of poor judgment? Man. All right. Well, if you like this micro episode of the Sense and Signal podcast, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And we'll see you again soon. Hope everyone has a great new year.